He said it without hesitation, without emotion, like he was telling me what he had for breakfast. It wasn't an accident. I did it on purpose. We were 20 minutes into our first session, and I'd been listening to what I thought was a story about a tragic car crash that had left his younger sister paralyzed from the waist down. A crash he'd been driving in. A crash that had haunted him for 3 years. But now he was telling me it wasn't an accident at all. And before I could even process that confession, before I could ask the obvious questions, he leaned forward and said, "And I need to tell you why. Because if I don't tell someone, I think I'm going to lose my mind. Stick around, because what he told me in the next hour, the reason behind what he did, it's going to change the way you think about family, about sacrifice, and about the impossible choices people make when they're desperate." Before we go any further, I need to make something clear. All names have been changed, and any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. These are composite stories based on years of clinical experience, designed to protect client confidentiality. What I'm about to share is real in the way that moral dilemmas are real, but the specifics have been altered. I've been a licensed therapist for 14 years. I've worked with over 1,700 clients, and in that time, I've learned that the word accident is often a lie we tell ourselves to make the unbearable bearable. But this client, let's call him Alex, wasn't interested in that lie anymore. He was ready to tell the truth, and the truth was so much darker than any accident could ever be. Alex was 28 when he came to see me, worked in finance in Chicago, clean-cut, articulate, the kind of person you'd never suspect of intentionally harming anyone. His sister Emma was 25, had been in a wheelchair for 3 years since the crash, and according to the police report, according to the insurance investigation, according to everyone who'd looked at the case, it had been a terrible accident. Black ice, loss of control, tragic but unavoidable. Except it wasn't. "I saw the ice," Alex said calmly. "I saw it ahead of us on the bridge. I had time to slow down, to brake, to avoid it completely, but I didn't. I accelerated. I aimed for it. And when the car started spinning, when we were heading toward the guardrail, I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I let it happen. If you want to hear how this ends, hit subscribe right now, because the reason he did it will haunt you." Why? That was all I could ask. Why would someone intentionally crash a car with their own sister inside? Why would someone choose to hurt someone they supposedly loved? Alex took a deep breath, because Emma was going to destroy our family, and I was the only one who knew, the only one who could stop her. And I had to make a choice between her body and everyone else's lives, and I chose everyone else. Stick around and subscribe, because what he told me next about what Emma was planning, it's the kind of secret that changes everything. 3 years ago, before the crash, Alex had discovered something about his sister. She'd been stealing from their parents, not petty amounts. Over 2 years, she'd taken nearly $200,000 from their retirement accounts, forging signatures, creating fake paperwork, systematically draining everything they'd saved for their future. Their parents were in their 60s, planning to retire in a few years, and Emma was taking everything. "I found out by accident," Alex said. "I was helping my dad with some financial documents, and I noticed discrepancies, withdrawals that didn't make sense. And I started digging, found emails, found transactions, found everything. And I confronted Emma about it. Emma hadn't denied it. She'd been calm about it, actually. Told Alex she'd needed the money for debts she'd gotten into, gambling debts, the kind that come with threats if you don't pay. She said she was going to pay it all back eventually, that their parents would never know, that everything would be fine. But Alex knew better. The money was gone. The debts were paid, but the savings were destroyed. And their parents were months away from finding out when they tried to access their retirement accounts. "I begged her to confess," Alex said, "to tell them the truth before they found out on their own, to give them a chance to prepare. But she refused. Said she couldn't face them, said it would kill them. And then she said something that changed everything. She said, 'If you tell them, I'll make sure they think you were involved.' I'll tell them you helped me, that it was your idea, and they'll hate you instead of me. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of understanding what Alex had done. So, I had a choice, Alex continued. I could let her frame me for something I didn't do. I could let my parents lose their savings and their relationship with me. Or I could find another way to stop her. And the thing is, if Emma was disabled, if she needed care, then my parents couldn't retire anyway. Their money would go to taking care of her instead of discovering it was already gone. The theft would never be discovered because the money would be needed for her medical expenses instead of retirement. It was the only solution that saved everyone. Everyone except Emma, I said quietly. Everyone except Emma, he agreed. The logic was horrifying in its clarity. Alex had calculated that if Emma was injured badly enough to require lifelong care, his parents would never question where their retirement money went. They'd assume it was being used for medical expenses, equipment, therapy. The stolen $200,000 would be invisible, absorbed into the larger catastrophe of caring for a disabled child. Emma's crime would be buried under her tragedy, and their parents would never have to know they'd been betrayed. How long did you plan it? I asked. 2 weeks. I researched car accidents. What kind of injuries were survivable but permanent? What speed, what angle, what impact would give me the result I needed? I'm not proud of that, but I needed to know that I could control the outcome, that I wouldn't kill her, just stop her. Here's what nobody notices about premeditated violence. It requires a complete compartmentalization of empathy. Alex had to look at his sister not as a person but as a problem, and he had to convince himself that solving the problem was worth the cost. That's not psychopathy. That's something more common and more terrifying. It's ordinary rationalization taken to its logical extreme. Did Emma know? I asked. In the moment before impact, did she realize what you were doing? Alex was quiet for a long time. I don't know. I think maybe she did. Because right before I accelerated toward the ice, she looked at me, and there was this moment, just a second, where I saw recognition in her eyes, like she understood, but she didn't say anything, didn't grab the wheel, didn't scream. She just looked at me, and then we hit. The crash had been exactly as Alex planned. His sister's spine was injured at T12, paralysis from the waist down, permanent but not life-threatening. She'd survived. She'd never walk again, and she'd never steal from their parents again either. The medical bills had been enormous. Their parents had used all their remaining savings, taken out loans, reorganized their entire lives around caring for Emma. They'd never retired, never would retire, but they also never discovered the theft, never knew their daughter had betrayed them. They just knew she needed them, and they'd given everything to help her. If you're hooked, subscribe, because I have hundreds of these stories, and what Alex told me about living with this secret gets so much darker. Does Emma know it was intentional? I asked. We've never talked about it directly, but yes, I think she knows. There's this look she gives me sometimes, when our parents aren't around. It's not quite accusation, it's more like understanding. Like we have this terrible secret between us, and neither of us can ever speak it out loud, because speaking it would destroy everything. Our parents, our family, both of us. So we just live with it. This unspoken truth that hangs between us every time we're in the same room. This is the real torture of what Alex did. Not legal consequences, not guilt in the traditional sense, but the permanent, unresolvable tension of living with someone who knows what you did to them and why. Emma couldn't report him without explaining her own crime. Alex couldn't confess without destroying his parents. They were locked together in mutually assured destruction, maintaining a facade of family while carrying the weight of what had really happened. Do you regret it? I asked. Alex thought about it carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Emma made choices that forced me to make that choice. But do I regret the actual decision? No, because it worked. My parents never found out. They still love both of us. They still have dignity and purpose taking care of Emma. She's alive. They're together. The family survived, just not in the way anyone intended. Would you have done the same thing? If someone you loved was about to destroy your family, would you be capable of stopping them violently to protect others? I'm genuinely curious what you think. Let me know in the comments. But here's what Alex hadn't told me yet. The reason he'd finally come to therapy 3 years later. Something had changed. Something had broken the terrible equilibrium between him and Emma. And that something was about to unravel everything. Emma's been seeing someone, Alex said. A guy she met at physical therapy, and it's getting serious. And last month, she told me she's going to tell him everything. About the theft, about the crash, about what I did. She says he deserves to know who she really is before they get more serious. And if she tells him, it's only a matter of time before my parents find out, before everything I did to protect them becomes meaningless. The carefully constructed protection Alex had built through violence was about to collapse because Emma had decided honesty in her new relationship was more important than maintaining the family lie, and Alex was faced with the same choice again: stop her or let it happen. Except this time, he couldn't crash a car, he couldn't use violence, he had to find another way, or accept that everything he'd done, everything he'd sacrificed, was about to be for nothing. Before I tell you what Alex was planning to do, before I revealed the worst part of this story, hit that subscribe button. What are you going to do? I asked. Alex leaned forward. That's why I'm here. Because I've thought about it constantly for the past month, and I keep coming back to the same solution. I need to confess first. I need to tell my parents what Emma did before she tells her boyfriend what I did. I need to control the narrative, make them understand why I made the choice I made. And maybe they'll forgive us both, or maybe they'll hate us both, but at least it will be over. At least I won't be waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's one option, I said. What's the other? Alex's face went cold. The other option is I make sure she can't tell anyone, not violently, but there are other ways to silence someone, discredit them. Make sure that if she does talk, nobody believes her, paint her as unstable, as confused about what really happened. I've been thinking about how to do that, what evidence I'd need to plant, what narrative I'd need to construct, and the fact that I'm thinking this way, that I'm capable of this level of manipulation, that's what finally made me realize I need help, because I'm not sure I'm a good person anymore. I'm not sure I ever was. Here's what I had to help Alex understand. He'd spent 3 years believing he'd made a difficult but justified choice, that he'd sacrificed his sister's mobility to protect his parents from a devastating truth. But what he'd actually done was create a prison for everyone involved. His parents were trapped caring for a daughter whose injury was intentional. Emma was trapped in a wheelchair, carrying the knowledge of both her crime and his. And Alex was trapped in the role of the dutiful son, the supportive brother, while knowing he was the architect of all their suffering. You said Emma has been looking at you differently, I said. Since when? Always. Since the day she got out of the hospital, but it's gotten more intense lately, more accusing, like she's building up the courage to say something out loud. And I think her boyfriend is part of that. He's giving her strength, making her feel like maybe honesty is possible, maybe redemption is possible. And that terrifies me because her redemption means my exposure. What Alex described next made everything even more complicated. He'd been monitoring Emma's relationship carefully, following her social media, tracking her boyfriend's background, looking for weaknesses, for leverage, for anything he could use if it became necessary. I know where he works. I know he has a DUI from 5 years ago. I know his ex-girlfriend filed a restraining order that was later dropped. I have information that could make Emma question him, make her doubt whether he's trustworthy enough to confess to her. And I've been thinking about how to deploy that information without it looking like it's coming from me. So, you're considering destroying her relationship to keep your secret. I'm considering protecting my parents from unnecessary pain, Alex corrected. They're in their late 60s now. Dad has heart problems. Mum has been showing early signs of dementia. Finding out that Emma stole from them that I intentionally paralyzed her, that their entire family has been built on violence and lies. It could literally kill them. Is that dramatic? Maybe, but it's also possible. And I have to weigh Emma's desire for honesty against the very real risk of destroying what's left of our parents' lives. Before I tell you the worst part, the revelation that changes everything about this story, hit that subscribe button, because what happened next made even me question everything. In our second session, a week later, Alex told me he'd made a decision. He was going to tell his parents everything, not because it was the right thing to do morally, but because he'd realized something. Emma was going to talk regardless. She'd already started the process by confiding in her boyfriend, and once that door was open, it was only a matter of time before it opened wider. I can either control the confession or let it control me, he said, and I'd rather face consequences on my terms than wait for them to arrive on hers. But then he told me something that changed the entire story, something that made me question everything I thought I understood about Alex's motivations. There's something else, he said, something I didn't tell you in our first session, because I didn't know if I could say it out loud. But Emma didn't just steal from our parents. She stole from me too. $50,000 from a trust fund my grandmother left me. She had access to the account and she emptied it. That's what made me start looking at the rest of the finances. And when I found out about our parents' money, I realized the theft from me was just practice. The crash wasn't just about protecting his parents. It was also about revenge, about punishing Emma for taking something that belonged to him. And suddenly, the moral calculus shifted. This wasn't a difficult choice between two bad options. This was violence, motivated partially by personal grievance, disguised as family protection. Why didn't you tell me that before? I asked. Because it makes me look worse. It makes it look like I paralyzed my sister, partly out of anger, out of payback. And maybe that's true. Maybe I can't separate the protection from the revenge. Maybe they're the same thing. I wanted to stop her from hurting others, and I wanted her to pay for what she'd done to me. And the crash accomplished both. Does that make it less justified or more honest? If you were in my position, what would you have said? How do you help someone who's committed violence for mixed motives, some altruistic and some selfish, and who can't separate them anymore? Comment below, because this is where therapy became impossible. What happened in our third session was the part that still keeps me up at night. Alex came in and told me Emma had tried to kill herself. She'd taken an overdose of pain medication 2 nights earlier. Her boyfriend had found her in time. She was in the hospital, stable, but the suicide attempt had revealed everything. In her note, she'd confessed to the theft, confessed to knowing the crash was intentional, confessed to living with unbearable guilt for 3 years. And now their parents knew everything. They called me from the hospital, Alex said. His voice was flat, emotionless. My mum was crying so hard she couldn't speak. My dad just said, "What did you do?" And I told them the truth, all of it. And you know what happened. Nothing. They didn't scream, didn't disown me. They just sat there in the hospital room looking at both of us, at Emma in the bed and me standing in the doorway. And my dad said, "Our family is broken. It's been broken for 3 years and we didn't even know it." Alex's parents hadn't pressed charges, hadn't kicked him out of their lives, but they'd also never looked at him the same way again. The knowledge of what he'd done, what Emma had done, what they'd all been living with, it had fractured something fundamental. They were still a family in form, but no longer in substance, going through motions of holidays and phone calls, while carrying the weight of knowing what they were capable of doing to each other. Emma survived, Alex said, but I don't know if that's good or bad. She's alive, but now everyone knows what she did and what I did, and there's no going back. The secret I tried to protect by paralyzing her, it came out anyway. Through her suicide note, everything I did was for nothing. This is where I had to tell Alex something he didn't want to hear. Everything he'd done wasn't for nothing. It was worse than that. It had accomplished exactly what it was designed to accomplish, just not in the way he'd intended. Emma was paralyzed. The theft was hidden for 3 years. His parents' remaining savings went to medical care instead of revealing the missing money. The plan had worked perfectly, but plans built on violence have a way of metastasizing, of creating consequences that spread beyond the original intent. Emma's paralysis didn't just hide the theft. It created unbearable guilt that led to a suicide attempt that exposed everything anyway. Alex hadn't failed. He'd succeeded so completely that the success destroyed what he was trying to protect. "Do you still think it was worth it?" I asked. Alex stared at his hands. "I think about that question every day, and the answer keeps changing. Some days I think yes, I bought my parents 3 years of peace they wouldn't have had otherwise. 3 years where they could love both of us without knowing what we'd done. 3 years of ignorance that was kinder than truth. Other days I think no, I should have just let Emma confess back then. Let the chips fall. Let everyone deal with the consequences honestly, instead of building this elaborate lie that collapsed anyway. Here's what this case taught me about premeditated harm, and I need you to hear this carefully. When you hurt someone to protect others, you don't just harm the target, you harm yourself. You harm everyone who loves you. You create ripples that spread outward in ways you can't predict or control." Alex thought he was making a calculated sacrifice, Emma's legs for his parents' peace of mind. But what he actually sacrificed was his family's ability to trust each other, his own ability to see himself as a good person, Emma's will to live. The cost was so much higher than he'd calculated. If this story affected you, if it made you think about the harm we're capable of justifying, subscribe for more. There are secrets you haven't heard yet. "What happens now?" I asked Alex in what turned out to be our final session. "Emma's in residential treatment, psychiatric facility. She'll be there for at least 6 months. My parents are in therapy together, trying to process everything. And me, I'm here, telling you this story, trying to figure out if I'm a monster or just someone who made an impossible choice. And I don't think you can tell me the answer to that. I don't think anyone can." He was right. I couldn't tell him if what he'd done was justified. That's not my role. But I could tell him what the consequences were. And the consequences were that he'd have to live for the rest of his life knowing he'd intentionally paralyzed his sister. That his parents would always wonder if they'd raised someone capable of such calculated violence. That Emma would always be in a wheelchair, a permanent reminder of what he'd chosen. That's not punishment. That's just reality. The reality of living with a choice that can never be unmade. "There's one more thing," Alex said as he stood to leave. "Something I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure if it mattered. But I think it does. The night before the crash, Emma apologized. She came to my apartment and she told me she'd decided to confess to our parents. That she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. That she was going to tell them everything the next day and accept whatever consequences came. And I convinced her not to. I told her we could figure out another way. That confession would destroy them. That we just needed more time. And she believed me. She trusted me. And the next day, I crashed the car. The room went cold. This wasn't protection. This wasn't even revenge. This was premeditated violence against someone who was already choosing honesty. Emma had been about to confess. The problem was solving itself. And Alex had stopped her, convinced her to wait, and then made sure she could never confess by making her injury the bigger story. He hadn't protected his parents from devastating truth. He'd protected himself from Emma's redemption, from her choosing to face consequences he didn't want her to face because it might implicate him in not reporting her earlier. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I needed someone to know the whole truth. Not the version where I'm a tragic figure making impossible choices. The version where I'm someone who deliberately hurt a person who was trying to do the right thing. Because I wanted her to suffer. Because I wanted her to pay. And I used my parents as an excuse. That's who I really am. And I needed to say it out loud to someone before I could decide what to do about it." "What are you going to do about it?" Alex looked at me with eyes that held something I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not remorse, just exhaustion. I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe I'll tell Emma what I just told you. That she was trying to confess and I stopped her. That her paralysis wasn't protection, it was punishment. Maybe she deserves to know that. Or maybe it would just be more cruelty, more harm. And maybe I've done enough harm for one lifetime. He left my office. I never saw him again. But 6 months later, I read a news article about a woman named Emma, though that wasn't her real name, who'd completed treatment and was advocating for disability rights and restorative justice. The article mentioned her brother, who'd been driving during the accident that paralyzed her. It said they were estranged now, that the family was working through complex trauma, that healing was possible even from the deepest wounds. I don't know if Alex ever told Emma the full truth. I don't know if his parents ever learned about Emma's planned confession. I don't know if any of them found peace with what happened. What I know is that violence, even violence disguised as protection, creates wounds that never fully heal. Alex thought he was solving a problem, but he was creating a wound that would bleed for decades. In himself, in Emma, in everyone who loved them. And here's the question I'm left with, the one that haunts me about this case and about human nature in general. When we hurt others to protect people we love, are we heroes making impossible sacrifices, or are we just finding sophisticated ways to justify cruelty? Alex would say he was protecting his parents, but he was also punishing his sister. He was also protecting himself. He was also feeding something dark inside him that wanted revenge. And maybe that's the truth about most violence. It's never just one thing. It's never purely protective or purely cruel. It's always a mix. And we choose which motivation to emphasize when we tell the story. Alex chose to emphasize protection, but what he actually did was punish someone who was trying to make amends. And that's the worst part that the title promised. Not that he crashed the car on purpose, but that he crashed it to stop Emma from doing the right thing, to stop her from confessing and taking responsibility. He paralyzed her not to protect anyone, but to control the narrative, to make sure the story was told his way, with her as the villain and him as the complicated protector. And in doing that, he became exactly what he accused her of being, someone willing to destroy others to protect himself. That's the real confession. Not it wasn't an accident, but I hurt someone who was trying to be better than me, and you can't come back from that. You can only live with it, and hope that somehow the people you've hurt find ways to heal that don't require your participation. Because sometimes the best thing you can do after causing harm is step back. Stop trying to control the damage. Let the people you've hurt write their own next chapters without you in them. And that wasn't even the darkest confession I've heard. But that's a story for another time.